He's known for his composure, his skill on the field, and his relentless drive for success. But today, in the middle of a bustling TV studio in London, Cristiano Ronaldo is about to face a question no one was prepared for. A question not about football, but about his personal life. The sun had just started to rise over London as the crew at Morning View Live began preparations for what was touted as their most important interview of the year. Cristiano Ronaldo wasn't here for a football match or a trophy ceremony. He was sitting in a cozy chair in a modern TV studio, just steps away from the famous River Thames. Backstage, the excitement was palpable. Lights were being tested, makeup artists were in full swing, and producers were huddled in quiet conversation. Lucy, one of the producers, leaned over to a colleague, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Do you think he'll stay cool, or will he finally break out of his calm persona?" "Probably calm," came the reply. "He's too professional." To Cristiano, Ronaldo had just stepped out of his car. He wore a simple jacket, no flashy accessories, just his signature calm aura that people recognize. Instantly, the receptionist, with wide eyes, couldn't help but speak up. "You're taller than I thought," she blurted. With his usual playful grin, Ronaldo responded, "I guess TV makes everyone look smaller." Inside, the host, Amanda, flicked through her notes. Her voice was smooth, warm, but sharp enough to keep Ronaldo on his toes. Known for her probing questions, she had a few tricks up her sleeve today. The show went live at 8 a.m. sharp, with the camera shifting from Amanda's charming smile to Ronaldo's composed expression. "Good morning, everyone," Amanda greeted the audience. "Today, we have a legend in the studio. But it's not just about football today." The words hung in the air like an invitation for something deeper. She started with an easy question to set the tone. "Cristiano, do you still pop into local supermarkets like the rest of us? Or do you have someone run errands for you now?" The studio chuckled, and Ronaldo smiled. "I still go. I actually enjoy it. You never know what you'll find on the discount shelf." The tone was light. A few laughs followed, but the audience was already hooked, leaning in for more. Amanda continued, shifting the conversation to Ronaldo's arrival in the UK. "What was it like adjusting to the weather in Manchester? And did you actually understand any of the chants from the fans?" At first, Ronaldo chuckled, his signature smile widening. "The weather? I had to get used to the rain, that's for sure," he said, a twinkle in his eye. "As for the chants, well, I understood the passion. But some of the accents, those were a bit of a challenge." The studio laughed, and the mood lightened. Even further, Amanda then asked about his early days, growing up in Madeira, and the hard work it took to make it in football. Ronaldo shared stories of his childhood, the long hours, the sacrifices, and the hunger to succeed. "I didn't have much growing up," he explained, "but I always knew football was my way out. I had to give everything I had." The audience leaned in, the air thick with respect. They were no longer just listening to a footballer. They were hearing the story of a man who fought through adversity. Amanda nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "What was that moment when you felt like your life was about to change forever? Was it when you joined Manchester United? Ronaldo took a breath before answering, his voice steady. When I moved to England, that's when everything felt real, he said. Before that, I was just a young kid trying to make it. But when I walked into Old Trafford, that's when I knew this was the big stage, and the world was watching. The studio was completely absorbed in his words, the personal side of Ronaldo making him even more relatable. But Amanda had more to ask. People know you for your incredible footballing achievements, but we also know you're involved in a lot of charitable work. Can you tell us a little more about that? Ronaldo nodded, his demeanor still humble. I've always believed in giving back. It's not just about scoring goals or breaking records. It's about using the platform you have to help others. Whether it's funding hospitals or supporting children's charities, I feel it's important to make a difference. There was a warm round of applause from the audience. Amanda smiled at him, clearly impressed by his words. But there was a slight change in her expression, a hint of curiosity, perhaps even something more pointed in her eyes. Well, Cristiano, she said, leaning in just a little, you've built quite a reputation off the pitch as well. You've always been open about your faith, your family, and your values. But I have to ask, does it ever feel like that puts you at odds with what some people expect of you? In the public eye, the studio quieted, the energy shifting as the room awaited Ronaldo's response. Ronaldo took a moment, his eyes steady, his posture unwavering. No, he said simply, it doesn't feel like a burden at all. Faith is part of who I am. Just like being Portuguese or being a father, people can have different views. But I never hide who I am. Amanda tilted her head, intrigued. So you've never felt the need to tone it down for the sake of others? A soft laugh escaped Ronaldo's lips. You mean, do I skip prayers just to make others comfortable? He asked, the humor in his tone lightening the atmosphere. No, I don't change who I am to fit into someone else's idea of what's comfortable. I'm respectful of others, and I expect the same in return. The room went silent for a moment. As the audience absorbed his words, Ronaldo's calm, unwavering demeanor seemed to carry a weight that resonated beyond football. Amanda, sensing the power of the moment, leaned back in her chair, her gaze softening. And when you're on the field, she asked, how do you balance your commitment to faith with the demands of the game, particularly when it comes to Ramadan? Does that pose a challenge? Ronaldo shrugged, his face unchanged. You adapt, he said. You eat when the sun sets, train smarter, and you keep pushing forward. It's not a hardship, it's discipline. And discipline is key when you're facing tough opponents. There was something matter-of-fact about his response. He wasn't trying to make a grand speech about sacrifice or hardship. He was simply explaining how he lived his life. It was clear he didn't see his faith as something that should be viewed as a burden, just a part of who he was. The studio seemed to relax, the tension ebbing away as they began to truly listen to him not just as a footballer, but as a man with principles that extended far beyond the pitch. Amanda, perhaps trying to probe deeper into his private life, asked, and your family? They follow the same values? Ronaldo nodded. Yes, my wife, my children, they're part of that life. My daughter is growing up surrounded by it, not forced, just part of who we are. There was a brief silence, and then Amanda asked a question that felt a little heavier. And does your wife, living in England, ever feel like she's treated differently because of her faith, her choice to wear the veil? The entire room seemed to hold its breath as Ronaldo's expression remained neutral, though the weight of the question seemed to hang in the air. Ronaldo didn't flinch. His eyes remained steady, but the silence that followed felt like a quiet storm brewing. She's never had an issue with it, he said calmly. She chooses to wear it, just like someone chooses to wear a jacket when it's cold outside. There's no oppression in that. Amanda raised an eyebrow, trying to make sense of the answer. But surely, she pressed gently, living in a place like England, doesn't she sometimes feel like she's not quite free, like she's being judged for her choices? Ronaldo's expression softened, but his voice didn't change. Freedom isn't about what you wear, Amanda. It's about being able to make that choice without fear of judgment. My wife is free, she's strong, and she's proud of who she is. The studio grew quiet, everyone listening intently. There was no bravado in his voice, no anger, just the steady calm of a man who knew what he was saying was true. Amanda, still processing his response, tried to soften the atmosphere. I suppose what I'm trying to understand, she said, her voice quieter now, is how she feels living here in the UK. It must be difficult sometimes, being in the spotlight and always being looked at. Ronaldo leaned in slightly, his voice carrying the weight of experience. The difficulty doesn't come from what she wears or how she looks, he said. It comes from the assumptions people make, the stares, the whispers, the judgment. Amanda, perhaps sensing the gravity of the moment, softened. But isn't it hard to ignore? Ronaldo shook his head slightly, his expression resolute. It's not about ignoring. It's about understanding that the problem isn't with her. It's with the people who judge her for something they don't understand. If we all took a moment to understand each other better, maybe we'd stop making assumptions. The audience, which had been quiet up until this point, seemed to collectively exhale, as if they too were finally grasping the weight of what Ronaldo was saying. His words had a clarity to them, cutting through the layers of preconception and making everyone pause and think. Amanda took a deep breath, clearly taken aback by the strength and simplicity of his response. It's not always easy, though, is it? She asked quietly. Ronaldo's eyes met hers, and with a steady smile, he responded, "Nothing worth doing is ever easy, but it's worth doing for her, for my family, for everyone who chooses to live with integrity and respect." The studio was still. No one spoke. The tension in the room had shifted from discomfort to something more reflective, almost profound. And then, with a change of tone, Amanda asked, "And would you say your wife lives a free life, Cristiano? Or is she, in your eyes, oppressed in some way?" The question hung in the air like an unspoken challenge, and for a moment, the studio was frozen. Cristiano Ronaldo didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply sat, calm and composed. As the silence stretched out, oppressed, he repeated, his voice quiet but sharp. You really want to ask me that, Amanda? Realizing the weight of her question, tried to backtrack, a nervous smile creeping onto her face. I mean, respectfully, of course, she stammered. From a Western perspective, does she feel? Restricted, Ronaldo's gaze didn't waver. So, you're asking me whether my wife is oppressed? Based on how she dresses, his voice was calm, but the words carried a gravity that made the room feel much smaller. You're asking me to judge her life from a perspective that has no understanding of what freedom really is. The studio was still, and even Amanda seemed to realize the mistake she'd made. Ronaldo continued, his tone unwavering. My wife is one of the strongest women I know. She's not oppressed. She chooses her life, her clothes, how she raises our children. She does it with strength and grace that most people could only dream of. There was a slight shift in the room, as if the air had thickened with the weight of his words. Amanda, caught off guard, opened her mouth as though to respond, but then closed it. She looked at him, realizing there was no easy answer she could offer. And don't you worry, Ronaldo continued, about how she gets treated. The stares, the assumptions, the questions. He paused, letting the questions sit for a moment before speaking again. Yes, people stare. Yes, she's been told to go back to where she came from while simply walking down the street. Yes, she's treated differently because of her choices. But that's not oppression, Amanda. It's ignorance. The audience, sensing the power of his response, started to stir. A few murmurs passed through the crowd as they absorbed his words. Ronaldo wasn't just defending his wife, he was calling out the assumptions people made about her, about them, and about their lives. Amanda sat back, her expression changing, processing everything he had just said. But doesn't that make it harder to live here? She asked, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. No, Ronaldo said, his voice firm but calm. It doesn't make it harder. It makes us stronger. Because, at the end of the day, oppression isn't always a man with a stick. Sometimes it's a woman with a microphone asking questions that are rooted in centuries of assumptions. The room fell silent. His words hung in the air, as if everyone were suddenly re-evaluating their own assumptions. Amanda blinked, visibly shaken by the impact of his response. She leaned forward, trying to regroup. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to, Ronaldo interrupted gently. But that doesn't change the impact. His voice was steady, but the weight of his words lingered. Amanda, now visibly reflective, nodded slowly. The studio, too, seemed to understand the shift. There was no quick recovery from what Ronaldo had just said. It wasn't an argument. It was a truth, quietly stated but deeply profound. The producer, sensing the tension, gave Amanda a small signal. 2 minutes left. She cleared her throat, looking for a way to regain control of the interview. Amanda took a deep breath, her usual polished demeanor slipping for just a moment. She gave a small nod to herself before turning back to Ronaldo. Well, she said, forcing a smile, I suppose that's something we all need to think about. Ronaldo didn't respond immediately. but his steady gaze made it clear that he wasn't interested in continuing the back and forth. The interview had already taken a deeper turn than anyone anticipated, and it seemed like neither side was eager to let it go. Amanda, trying to regain some control, glanced at her notes. "Let's shift gears a bit, Cristiano," she said, her tone lighter now. "I'd like to talk about your life on the field again. You've had so many incredible moments, but I'm curious, when it's all said and done, what do you want to be remembered for?" Ronaldo's expression softened, though. His eyes still carried a certain intensity. "I want to be remembered for my work ethic, for the way I approached every game, every practice, and every challenge. I want people to know that I gave everything I had to the game." There was a brief pause as Amanda processed his answer. She nodded, clearly impressed, but then asked, "And when it comes to your family, how do they fit into that picture? Is football ever a burden for them?" Ronaldo smiled slightly, a quiet chuckle escaping his lips. "Football is part of who I am, but it doesn't define me. My family is my priority. I make time for them, even when it's difficult." The studio seemed to relax again, the lightness of the conversation bringing a welcome change. Amanda was about to move on to another topic when she paused, almost as though she was saving her last question for the right moment. "And what about your wife?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Is she as involved in football as you are?" Ronaldo's eyes twinkled with affection. "She's supportive, always has been. But she's not here for the fame or the spotlight. She's here because she loves me, and I love her. We've built our life together." Amanda smiled, visibly moved by his words. "That's beautiful, Cristiano. I suppose I have just one final question then." She paused, ensuring the question would land just right. "Would you say that you've ever faced challenges because of your relationship, or because of how people view your family?" Ronaldo's expression didn't change, but his voice grew softer, more reflective. "We've faced challenges, yes, but we've always faced them together, and that's all that matters." There was a subtle shift in the room, as the audience sensed that the interview was coming to a close. The camera lingered for a moment on Ronaldo's calm demeanor, his answers more introspective than anything the studio had expected. Amanda gave a small nod, her smile more genuine than before. "Well, Cristiano, thank you for your honesty today. It's been a pleasure to speak with you." Ronaldo nodded in return, a slight smile crossing his face. "Thank you for having me." As the interview wrapped up, the applause from the audience was warm but not overwhelming. It wasn't the kind of applause one gives when a celebrity simply shows up. It was a more respectful kind, the kind given when someone has shared something real. The cameras turned off, and the room began to settle. But as Amanda turned to her producer, she couldn't shake the lingering feeling of the conversation. She knew she had just participated in something far more significant than a simple interview. As the studio lights dimmed, the production crew began moving swiftly, preparing for the next segment. But Amanda remained seated, staring blankly at her notes. Lost in thought, she couldn't shake the feeling that the interview had taken a turn she hadn't anticipated, a turn that had left her with more questions than answers. She glanced toward the control room, where the producers were discussing the show's next steps. But her mind kept returning to the conversation with Ronaldo. What had just happened? She had asked him about his wife, about faith, about assumptions. And in return, he had given her answers that were, in a word, profound. It wasn't just that he'd handled her questions with grace, it was the way he had dismantled the assumptions behind those questions with a quiet power. There was no defensiveness in his words, no anger, just calm, direct truth. She sat back in her chair, reflecting on the words he'd said. Oppression isn't always a man with a stick. Sometimes it's a woman with a microphone asking questions. Rooted in centuries of assumptions, it wasn't an easy thing to hear, but it was something that lingered in the air long after the interview ended. Meanwhile, Ronaldo had already slipped out of the studio, his presence no longer a focal point. In the room, the moment had passed, but it hadn't gone unnoticed. As he walked down the corridor, a staff member handed him a cup of tea. He accepted it with a quiet smile, his usual calm, and nodded his thanks. Outside, the London sky had turned a dull grey, but Ronaldo didn't seem to mind. He walked to his car, his usual quiet demeanor in place. Yet there was something different about the way he carried himself today. The world was still watching him, but this time it wasn't just because of his footballing prowess. Back in the studio, Amanda turned to her producer, who had been watching the entire interview unfold. "Do you think I went too far with that last question?" she asked, her voice unsteady. The producer hesitated, then nodded slowly. "You pushed it, Amanda, but he handled it. And sometimes it's those uncomfortable questions that spark real change." Amanda sighed and nodded. She wasn't sure if the discomfort was something she would ever fully shake off, but at least she knew she'd learned something from it. Whether the viewers would see it the same way, she wasn't sure. As the day came to a close, the clip from the interview began to make waves. What had started as just another celebrity appearance turned into something far more significant. Within hours, social media was buzzing. Clips of Ronaldo's calm but powerful response to Amanda's questions were being shared across platforms, captioned with lines like, "This is how you handle ignorance with grace." And Ronaldo just taught us all something. It was everywhere. People were talking, debating, and reflecting on what had just transpired. The raw footage, unedited and unfiltered, was making an impact in a way that was hard to ignore. In the hours following the broadcast, Amanda found herself watching the responses come in. Some were critical, others defending her, but the majority were focused on Ronaldo's response. It was clear that he had shifted the conversation in a way that many hadn't expected. The clip, just 43 seconds long, was already approaching millions of views, and it wasn't just football fans who were sharing it. It was students, professionals, and everyday people who saw something in his words that resonated deeply across the country. At cafes, schools, and workplaces, people were discussing the interview. One young woman shared a video of herself online, speaking into the camera. "I used to think wearing a hijab was something women were forced to do," she said. "But after hearing what Ronaldo said today, I think I was wrong. In a cafe across the street from the studio, a couple discussed the interview over breakfast. Never thought I'd get emotional over a footballer, one said. He's more than that, though. He's decent. Just proper decent. Back in Liverpool, Ronaldo had returned to his usual routine. There were no celebrations or grand gestures. He simply went about his day, keeping his focus on what mattered most: his family, his faith, and his commitment to being true to himself. That evening, after a match in which he had scored 2 goals and assisted another, a reporter approached him, asking, "Cristiano, quite a week for you. How does it feel to start such a big conversation?" Ronaldo smiled, but it wasn't his usual wide grin. It was calm, knowing. "I didn't start the conversation. I just answered a question," he said simply. And that was it. The headline. The next morning wasn't about his footballing achievements, but about his character, his grace under pressure, and the way he had handled a loaded question. It was a story much bigger than football, one that touched on identity, assumptions, and respect. Back at the studio, Amanda sat in her dressing room, reflecting on the fallout. A makeup artist stopped by, offering a cup of tea. "You okay?" she asked gently. Amanda nodded slowly. "I think I am," she said quietly. It's a lot to process, but I think I've learned something important today." Later that evening, Amanda received a handwritten letter, a rarity. In the age of digital communication, it was from a woman in Manchester, a teacher, who had written, "I used to think women who wore headscarves were oppressed, but after watching your interview with Ronaldo, I've started to see things differently. I've started asking questions, and I'm learning." Amanda smiled softly as she read the note. She wasn't looking for praise, but this small gesture meant more than she could put into words. As for Ronaldo, his life continued. There were no grand speeches or declarations. He didn't need them. His actions on the pitch, off the pitch, and in that interview spoke for themselves. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all was the way he had shown that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stay calm, be yourself, and speak the truth. The world had heard him, and for a brief moment, it felt like the conversation had shifted just a little bit toward understanding. If you were moved by Cristiano Ronaldo's words today, and believe that conversations like these can change the way we see the world, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Share this video with your friends and family, because these are the moments that matter. Let's keep the conversation going. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and tell us, what did you learn from Ronaldo's response? We'd love to hear from you. And remember, there's always more to come. So stay tuned for the next chapter of stories that make a difference.